Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at 5 particularly interesting starts to try out in EU5 that you might otherwise have overlooked. It can be a little overwhelming picking a less familiar country to play with so many tiny little nations littered across the map, so hopefully this will bring to light some fun picks that are a little off the beaten path. So, while I won't be recommending the more obviously interesting starts like France or the Ottomans or members of the HRE in this video, each fun to play in their own right with cool and interesting mechanics and events of their own, these picks are all still guaranteed to be engaging, challenging, and varied with something for every kind of playstyle. If you've been playing and have some recommendations of your own, drop them in the comments down below, but otherwise with no more time to waste on an introduction, with timestamps below and in no particular order, let's begin. Majapahit. Of the starts we'll be looking at today, this is perhaps the easiest one for a few reasons that'll become obvious as we go over some details. That's not to say it's easy start to finish, just probably easier than the others, especially at the beginning, with very few people picking a fight with you as the local hegemon. Just about 44 years old at the start of the game, historically, Majapahit grew to conquer almost the entire Indonesian archipelago by the early 1400s, even conquering the Malay Peninsula, only to collapse a mere century after. The arrival of the Sultanate of Demak and the spread of Sunni Islam will cause the decline of Majapahit in-game much like it did in history, introducing a serious disaster that can see your nation broken apart if poorly handled. With shrewd politics and the right pursuits, you can overcome this disaster and make Majapahit quite the imperial nation of its own before the arrival of the Europeans, securing a vice grip on key trade goods and routes, using massive stores of gold to further bolster your economy and fend off the Europeans to become a great power in the east. Majapahit kicks things off with 4 urban locations, including a city, giving you a much broader set of options for buildings and goods production right off the bat. They also start with 4 vassals and 2 tributaries, providing a decent amount of wealth to an already overflowing treasury that generates a not insignificant amount of ducats per month right at the start of the game through tax and the sale of food. Majapahit also runs its own market, with the market center located right next to your capital's location, and you start with plenty of trade capacity and advantage both. You'll have a massive army of levies at your disposal, and you can build a sergeantry to increase your manpower gain and your crown power right at the start of the game, and you have a small but notable navy of regulars that can help you move troops around, crush the opposition, and generally control the seas, spreading maritime presence in adjacent markets to further your trade interests. Plus, the unique Jong light ship gives more maritime presence per ship than the average light ship of the era, allowing you to improve proximity and control in the region while also securing your mercantile pursuits. You've got a massive number of sailors at your disposal right at the start, so you can relatively quickly build an even more grand navy and establish yourself as a serious thalassocracy. And thanks to these sailors, you can even establish colonies very early on. Secure some liquor production or imports, and then head over to the Geopolitics tab to uncover parts of Australasia. You can then pay for colonial charters to actually establish yourself on these uncovered lands before anybody else even thinks to head in those directions. Not only are these lands rich in gold, but they provide access to plenty of other high-demand resources too, as well as largely uncontested growth opportunities. Meanwhile, closer to home, you can declare wars across the archipelago or create positive relationships and establish trade offices in foreign lands if you prefer to simply spread your mercantile tendrils instead. Your power projection is a little low to start, despite all the other advantages you've got going for you, so you might want to spend some time and money to embrace meritocracy and then research the appropriate tech to give your power projection the massive boost it needs to force yourself into others' territory. A struggle here is securing some of the later institutions that interesting mechanics are locked behind, but there's plenty else to do in the meantime. Vijayanagar. With a name that means City of Victory, this is one of the youngest polities you can play as in EU5, having just been established in 1336. Established in an attempt to resist the spread of the Delhi Sultanate, the empire went on to stand until the mid-1600s, and though they outlasted the Delhi Sultanate itself, they weren't able to hold back against the various Deccan sultanates that rose from Delhi's ashes. In EU5, you're able to play through a plethora of dynamic historical events as Vijayanagar, with a variety of unique bonuses to make for a strong army, a strong culture, and even allowing you to make a subcontinent of multiple religions living together in harmony. The kingdom rank to start gives you some advantages compared to other small starts, and you have some pretty hefty coffers as the game begins too, with a great monthly balance to boot. Gold, gems, incense, and pepper are great trade goods that you start with gold being particularly helpful in bolstering your economy as you're able to mint more and more with, for example, control over the coinage right off the bat. But you're not particularly powerful in either of the markets you're in when the game starts, and market access is very low as well, significantly reducing the output of your buildings and the tax base you're able to collect from. Creating your own market nice and early will make a significant difference to your economy, and that's well worth investing in pretty much immediately. Making moves for economic dominance aside, you are surrounded by several weaker nations ripe for the taking, and you can forge early alliances with some of the other big players in the region pretty easily. Whether you prefer the path of peace or war, there's a lot of opportunity for you to become the local hegemon. This becomes especially true when the Delhi Sultanate starts to collapse. This inevitable event can have a few different outcomes, but typically you'll see the massive powerhouse to your north fall apart into countless little pieces, and even though the populations of these locations are all majority Hindu, some of the nations that form will be non-Hindu, and that means you can use the religious war casus belli to take them for yourself one by one. Others will fall under provinces that you can lay claim to by following the historical options leading up to the fall of Delhi, and either way, it'll take a long time to conquer, integrate, and core the entire subcontinent. If you can pull it off though, you can form Bharat. Once that's done, you can push in a few different directions, exploring Madagascar, nudging into Africa, conquering the Middle East. With such a populous and rich part of the world under your control, you've got plenty of options ahead. The big struggle here will be securing institutions to keep up with the world when it comes to tech. Even meritocracy starts just outside of your reach, and you might quickly find yourself falling behind your counterparts if you don't make the right moves. Get within Egypt or at least Mecca's trade range and start importing goods from them as they embrace institutions to help bring them over to your own lands as soon as possible, using the right buildings and technologies, including those unique to Hindu nations, to hurry up their spread. Keep in mind that embracing institutions is faster and cheaper with smaller population sizes and fewer locations, so expansion needs to be balanced against this looming threat of falling behind from a tech perspective. Vijayanagar provides an interesting challenge in conquering the subcontinent alone, with massive armies clashing pretty much right from the start, but it's nowhere near impossible to overcome, especially with the economic strength you have right from the beginning. Sultanate of Kilwa. This is a slightly more challenging start, and the nation itself has a very interesting history, established around the turn of the millennium, built off the back of purchased land, blending Perso-Arab and local Bantu cultures, and in reality a confederation of urban settlements rather than a nation-state that became masters of commerce and trade. While they weren't able to stand against the Portuguese when they arrived, thanks largely in part to infighting and power struggles, you can recreate the grandeur of the Sultanate and accomplish more than they ever did, recreating many of their activities and pursuing 10 dynamic historical events and 13 country-specific bonuses that do everything from bolster sailor output and harbor capacity to improve trade range, increase gold output, bolster maritime presence through unique ships that do a better job of it than their counterparts, and much, much more besides. This is a commerce-heavy nation, and it even has government reforms that enable a greater trade capacity and more minting too, and the access to resources here will take advantage of both of those, with the Al-Zakat Wajib advance bolstering minting threshold very early on. Be warned though, that maximizing your minting capabilities will involve importing silver, because while gold is plentiful here, silver unfortunately is not. The immediate surroundings can be colonized quite quickly, giving access to ivory, marble, cotton, and eventually the great stores of gold. Even before that though, you can work towards solving your food and financial situation by upgrading your rice, fish, and fruit RGOs, building windmills, and securing nearby rice, sturdy grain, and legume-producing locations. Middle Rufiji in particular has some cheap colonial charters. Between your 10 vassals and some smart early decisions, you should be able to secure a positive balance. Lock your initial Kilwan shipwrights to save some money, pick out some profitable trades, and reduce some expenses while you work on improving your income, building profitable buildings as you accumulate the money to do so, growing your tax base, watching your income through minting grow as a result as well. You do start with a town, which means you have more production options available to you, and you also own the market center for the Kilwa Kisiwani market, meaning you can dominate trade in the area, importing and exporting as you please to maximize profits. Your faith allows you to go slave raiding, and you can build profitable slave markets, and when you've got the money, you can colonize further inland, pursue Madagascar, or war with your neighbors to dominate the coast. Another big benefit of Kilwa is that the Mecca market is within your trade range, meaning you'll be able to import and embrace modern institutions relatively quickly, never falling too far behind your European counterparts. If you can overcome the initial challenge of Kilwa's starting situation, you've got a very interesting road ahead. Cocom. The Cocom dynasty ruled the Yucatan Peninsula from around the 1200s to the 1400s, when they fell into disarray and collapsed into several Mayan polities shortly before the arrival of the Spaniards. Though there are no unique country bonuses or events here, the Mayan faith adds some spice, and that aside, I primarily find this start position to be quite interesting for a few different reasons, primarily tied to its location on the map. Cocom is one of the more powerful Mesoamerican starts, and if you want a more challenging run in the region, there are many smaller and weaker options, but it's not like Cocom is an easy run start to finish either, as you try to establish yourself as the local hegemon, perhaps form Maya, and then spread your reign across North and South America, waiting for Europeans and their advanced institutions to arrive at your shores. You start just as a county rank, giving you some limitations to your diplomatic options, but you're not far from being able to upgrade to the next tier up. That aside, you have a decent amount of money to start with, but a fairly small tax base, meaning you won't get that money back in a hurry, and you need to be wise about how you invest it. The RGOs will be of particular importance, as will acquiring masonry to unlock a plethora of building options, alongside the export of food to make money, and expansion in the right directions. Though you already start with some interesting resources, expanding across the peninsula will give you access to more cocoa as well as chili, amber, gems, copper, and more to introduce into your market and trade with. Gold and silver lie on either side of the peninsula, often in uncolonized lands, and these will be helpful not just for trade, but for increased minting output when the time comes too. You're able to colonize vast expanses here nice and early, provided you've got the money. Pretty much all of Mexico is open to you, though you do have to expand across it piece by piece, and the same goes for the rest of Central America too. You can get all the way down to modern-day Ecuador or so before the shroud of terra incognita must be pushed back. By the time you get there, though, you can build a sergeantry and acquire the manpower needed to explore and continue your colonization efforts. There is a fork in the road here, though. Rather than spreading across all known land first, you could rush to colonize the northernmost parts visible to you and then explore further into North America to find and secure tin. This is an extremely rare resource in the game, especially on this side of the map, and it's also a key bottleneck to exploration. Without tin, you can't produce naval supplies, but indeed once you secure tin and copper and a few other resources, you can take sailors out to sea to explore Cuba, the Caribbean, and whatever else exploration of the seas might unlock to gain access to more gold and chili and tobacco and cocoa and pearls and on and on and on. There's so much out there. I really like how isolated a start this is, and in some ways, it really does feel like a completely novel experience compared to the old world. But on the topic of novel experiences, Onondowa'ga. One of the original members of the Haudenosaunee, the Onondowa'ga make for a very interesting and unique start in EU5, and in some ways I actually recommend them for beginners, even though I wouldn't consider them to be particularly easy. They just force you to take every aspect of the game very slowly and seriously by virtue of how limited they are for quite a large part of the start. Many of you might think this is a bad suggestion, but when I started playing as them, I really had to pare down my thinking and engage with one or two mechanics at a time and really maximize every single decision. So while it is slow, it made me appreciate some of the finer details that much more. For example, you start with no laws and policies, only gaining access to them when you research codified laws. Other texts unlock further options like cultural traditions and distribution of power, but ultimately, you'll really feel like you're building a nation from the ground up with any one of these choices. Heck, you're not even able to earn money from taxes at the start of your run here, instead needing to research taxation before you can do so. What a great way to learn the value of selling food for money, for example. You will start with a little bit of wealth to play with, and an early event gives you a 3 ducat per month boost to your income for a decent amount of time, but before taxes kick in, you really have to play the food market and invest wisely. Now, while any one of these nations could arguably be considered interesting for the same reasons, including overlapping country bonuses derived from them all being Haudenosaunee and tribal, there are some specifics that set the Onondowa'ga apart in my humble opinion. For one, among these nations, the Onondowa'ga are the only ones that have access to maize, and with it, a decent amount of wealth generation through the sale of food. This, in some ways, makes you the wealthiest of the 5 options here, and apart from investing in maize, you'll want to acquire masonry as well, as that will open up a plethora of options that generate some good money for your estates. You'll want to get the Three Sisters agriculture, seasonal economy, fishing habits, and anything else that increases the production of food, but since winter reduces food productivity, you'll also first want to secure taxation tech so that you can start skimming off the top of your estate's earnings. You might also seek to turn your neighbors into a tributary to further bolster your economy, but that's much easier said than done, though the alternative, I suppose, is war. If you're aiming to form the Tier 3 Haudenosaunee Kingdom, you're likely going to have to fight for many of the remaining locations. Getting the colonies tech will allow you to secure more locations and the levies they provide, but it'll also give you access to the tobacco to your west, and if you create a new market, you can then make a pretty penny through trade too. And heck, with the ability to colonize the unclaimed land around you, you'll be able to secure fur, copper, marble, iron, and much more maize, among other things. Be warned though, you'll need medicaments that you can't produce via an RGO until you secure the location of Tanawate, so you'll need to research the apothecary advance and build one in one of your towns first. And that means upgrading one of your rural settlements into a town, because you don't start with a town either. Make sure to upgrade specifically your capital to one when you get a chance, as this will not only be helpful in jumpstarting your colonization efforts, but it'll also allow you to start generating manpower. You should work towards centralization as quickly as possible, even going so far as getting a cabinet action going to push for it, and as soon as you get even 1 point towards centralization, you'll want to reform into a monarchy. This will then allow you to build a sergeantry in your capital, provided it's a town or a city, which will then generate manpower, which you can then use to explore the terra incognita around you and grow even stronger. You can get sailors to explore the coast as well once you get close enough, but again be warned, going out to sea beyond that requires naval supplies, and you won't actually be able to acquire that because nobody here produces tin. The nearest deposit is around the northern border of modern-day Mexico. Now you might get there eventually, but it's a long ways away. This is a very isolated start and a unique experience. Again, I think it's well worth trying out if you're interested in slow beginnings and in really feeling like you're building a nation from scratch, engaging with all of the various mechanics almost one at a time, learning them piece by piece. You have very limited options without any institutions spawning nearby especially, so you really do have to take things slowly here and hope that you've established a stronghold for when the inevitable happens. I had a lot more fun playing these guys than I'd initially anticipated, and I'd really like to see the Americas get a bit more fleshed out, but for the time being, these guys are a surprisingly great time. But there you have it, folks, 5 very distinct starts that you may not see typically recommended, but are well worth checking out for a variety of reasons. As you get some time in with the game, if you have any recommendations of your own, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to check them out myself. And if you found something you enjoyed here, let me know and consider hitting the like button. And if you've got some fun stories playing with one of these starts, please don't hesitate to share. I love reading those kinds of stories and how they play out, whether they're successful or not. Either way, folks, for more EU5 and strategy gaming in general, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.